Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of, absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like a clear-cut answer.
Exactly. You break your arm, you go into the clinic, the doctor slaps the x-ray up on the light board, points to that jagged white line in the bone, and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
It's very clean, very binary.
Right. It's either broken or it's not. But then you step into the world of macroeconomics and global development.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is pointing at something way more complex.
Yeah, far more contradictory. Today, for our deep dive, we aren't looking at a simple broken arm. We are looking at the X-ray of basically a high-performance athlete.
I like that analogy.
Because if you look at this athlete from the outside, everything is beautiful, right?
Yeah.
They're performing at an elite level, pulling in massive wealth, projecting incredible strength.
But then you put them under the X-ray.
Exactly. You look at the internal structures, the bones, the ligaments, the cardiovascular system, and they tell a story of just immense compounding stress.
You see this incredible adaptation to physical limits, sure, but you also see a terrifying underlying vulnerability.
Right, like one wrong step,
Yeah.
and the whole system could just snap.
And that framing captures the exact paradox we're exploring today.
Yeah.
Because the athlete under our microscope is the micro-island economy of Aruba.
Yeah. And I really want to establish exactly what we're looking at today, because the format of our source material heavily influences the insights we're about to pull from it.
It's definitely not your typical source material.
Not at all. We aren't looking at, glossy tourist brochures, and we aren't looking at a raw, messy database either.
Right.
We are unpacking a highly specific, meticulously outlined data brief. It's actually a foundational document originally designed for a top-tier presentation designer.
Yeah, it maps out the socioeconomic and environmental evolution of Aruba over decades.
And the visual mandate for this data is absolutely stark. It's fascinating.
The aesthetic instructions themselves are a deliberate analytical choice, when you really look at them.
Yeah, so let's talk about that lens. Because when you hear Aruba, what immediately pops into your head?
Usually high saturation imagery.
Right. The turquoise water, the blazing yellow sun, pristine white sand, luxury resort.
Or a postcard.
Exactly, the postcard. But the mandate for this presentation brief demands the exact opposite.
It's so rigid.
It dictates a strict, minimalist academic style. Pure white background. Absolutely zero 3D effects.
No distracting graphics whatsoever.
Right. Low saturation, muted, professional colors. It explicitly requires a purely data-driven narrative.
Where every key conclusion is highlighted only through, simple wireframes and minimalist arrows.
If you look at the cover slide 1, it's
Right.
just this pure white background. The title is written in a clean font on the left, separated by a thin gray line.
Prosperity and vulnerability of a micro-island economy.
Right, and the subtitle talks about structural characteristics, human capital, and environmental transition based on long-term macro data.
And the visual in that cover.
It's just a minimalist 2D abstract map of Aruba made entirely out of data points. No beaches, no palm trees.
They are aggressively stripping away the postcard, They don't want you distracted by the romanticized idea of a Caribbean paradise.
They want you to stare directly at the raw, often unforgiving machinery that keeps a microstate functioning.
Because microstates like Aruba act as, highly pressurized test tubes for global economics.
Code tubes, yeah.
When your entire country is just a tiny speck of land with a small population, you don't have the buffer of massive geography.
Or endless natural resources.
Exactly. Every single policy decision, every demographic shift, and every ripple in the global market is magnified 100-fold.
Wow. And the core mission of this deep dive is captured right there in the title. The dual reality of prosperity and vulnerability.
To understand how those two things coexist, we really have to start by looking at the fundamental blueprint of their reality, which is slide 2.
The executive summary.
Right. It uses a 4-quadrant infographic, very flat icons, core numbers, to lay out the 4 pillars that define Aruba's current existence.
Okay, let's break those down for everyone listening. Pillar 1, high income status. Their GDP per capita reaches the standards of wealthy developed nations.
Which is huge.
Yeah. Pillar 2, an extreme reliance on the service sector. We're talking 75 to over 80% of their entire economy.
Massive concentration.
Pillar 3, intense physical constraints. They have a population density exceeding 500 people per square kilometer.
That's incredibly dense.
And finally, Pillar 4, excellent governance. Their institutional effectiveness, sits at the highest global percentiles.
I really want to isolate that first pillar for a moment because achieving high income status as a microstate is an incredibly rare economic feat.
Is it really that rare?
Oh, absolutely. When you look at the global landscape, if you find a tiny population boasting a massive GDP per capita, they usually fall into one of two very specific categories.
Okay.
They are either a heavily protected tax haven or they are an oil-rich enclave.
So they either sit on a literal geyser of fossil fuels.
Or they've structured their legal system to act as a shadowy vault for global billionaires and multinational corporations.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
But Aruba doesn't fit neatly into either of those historical cheat codes. They built a high-income reality primarily through that second pillar.
The absolute, uncompromising dedication to the service sector.
Exactly.
Okay, let's apply some friction to that idea. You combine massive wealth and high connectivity with the third pillar, extreme population density.
Right, the 500 people per square kilometer.
Yeah, and for a lot of people listening to this, 500 people per square kilometer might just sound like an abstract number.
It's hard to visualize.
It is, but think about the psychological and physical reality of living in a four-pillar matrix like this. You're wealthy, you have access to modern amenities, high-speed internet, good schools.
But you're geographically trapped.
Yes. If you live in a dense city in North America or Europe and you get overwhelmed by the concrete and the crowds, you can get in a car.
Drive 4 hours into the mountains.
Exactly. You drive out to the countryside to decompress. In Aruba, you can't drive away. The city is the island and the island is the city.
It creates a socioeconomic pressure cooker. I mean, when a population attains high income status, their baseline expectations naturally elevate.
Sure, they want better things.
They demand high quality infrastructure, constant electricity, reliable imported goods, modern healthcare, pristine public spaces.
And the government has to deliver all of those first world amenities within a tightly confined, closed-loop geography.
A geography that possesses virtually no natural resources of its own, aside from the climate and the beaches.
Okay, let's unpack this. If they are so wealthy and their governance is so highly rated, why is vulnerability the shadow hanging over this entire analysis?
That's the big question.
Because from the outside, it looks like they won the game. They figured out how to get rich without sitting on a permanent oil reserve.
True, but wealth does not automatically equal resilience. The vulnerability is entirely structural. And to truly grasp the mechanics of that vulnerability, we have to look past the financial data.
We have to look at the biological reality of the people living there.
Exactly. Economics isn't just a study of money, it's a study of people, space, and time. We have to look at the demographic engine of the island.
Which brings us to slide 3, population dynamics.
Yes, high density and slowing growth.
The design here uses a dual-axis line and area chart, and the historical data on their population growth is staggering.
It really is.
We're looking at a timeline where the total population on the left axis doubled from just over 50,000 to over 100,000 people.
And concurrently, on the right axis, the population density skyrocketed from around 30 people per square kilometer to over 600 people per square kilometer.
But the critical inflection point in the data isn't the growth itself, right?
Yeah.
It's what's happening right now.
Right, the growth curve has hit a ceiling.
Yeah, the design brief explicitly asks for a downward-pointing red arrow at the end of the population line.
With the circle noting that the population growth rate is approaching stagnation or even negative growth.
Emphasizing the absolute carrying capacity limits of a micro-island.
And this brings us to a foundational concept in both biology and economics, carrying capacity.
Right.
Every ecosystem, whether it's a closed terrarium, a massive forest, or an island economy, has a maximum load it can sustain before the system begins to degrade.
Going from 30 people per square kilometer to over 600 in a matter of decades is a violent spatial shock.
It means every single road, every hospital bed, every water desalination plant, and every sewage pipe has had to be scaled up exponentially.
Year after year, just to keep the society functioning.
Exactly.
Let's make that tangible for you listening. I want you to imagine the neighborhood you live in right now.
The street you drive on.
The grocery store you go to. Now imagine that over the span of a single generation, that exact same physical footprint becomes 20 times more crowded.
The open lots are paved over.
The traffic multiplies by 20. The lines at the pharmacy multiply by 20. You adapt, you build denser housing, you manage it.
But then, right at the absolute peak of that crowding,
When you literally cannot build another house without tearing down something essential, the growth just stops.
And that stalling growth rate is the sound of an island hitting its absolute physical and economic wall.
Wow.
They cannot organically grow their domestic consumer base anymore, but, the total number of people is really only half the equation.
The far more dangerous vulnerability lies in the composition of those people.
Which brings us to slide 4, the demographic time bomb.
Right, irreversible aging. The data here maps out the island's population pyramid, contrasting historical demographics with current ones.
Or a multi-series line chart, depending on the visual layout.
Yeah, and there is a massive triumph hidden in here. Life expectancy has jumped beautifully from about 64 years to around 76 years.
People are living longer, healthier lives.
That is the direct dividend of their wealth and governance. But that triumph has a terrifying shadow.
The aging bracket.
Yes, the bracket of the population aged 65 and older has spiked from under 3% to over 17%.
That's a huge jump.
And at the exact same time, the youth bracket children aged 0 to 14 has plummeted from 42% down to under 17%.
And the slide actually calls for a red box highlighting the end of that 65-plus trend line.
With text explicitly saying, aging is irreversible, social security burden intensifying.
We really need to unpack the mechanics of how a demographic shift that violent actually happens, because it's not an accident.
Yeah.
It is a known phenomenon called the demographic transition. When an agrarian or developing society transitions into a high-income, highly educated service economy, birth rates collapse.
Why exactly? Is it just because people decide they don't want kids?
It's pure economic incentive. Think about it. In a poor agricultural society, children are an economic asset.
Right, they can work the farm.
Exactly. They represent free labor on the farm and a built-in retirement plan. But in a high-density, high-income service economy like Aruba...
Children become an immense economic liability.
Exactly. Housing on a tiny, crowded island is astronomically expensive.
And both parents usually need to work in the service sector just to afford the cost of living.
Which means paying for expensive childcare. Furthermore, because the economy demands high human capital, parents have to invest heavily in each child's education for them to be competitive.
So, the rational economic choice for a family in that environment is to have 1 or 2 children, or none at all, rather than 5 or 6.
Precisely.
So you have this massive cohort of people who built the island's wealth over the last few decades. They worked the hotels, they built the infrastructure, they paid the taxes.
And now they are retiring.
They're moving into that 65 and older bracket. And because life expectancy is so high, they're going to live for another 15 or 20 years.
Requiring pensions and increasingly complex healthcare.
But the generation behind them, the youth bracket that is supposed to replace them in the workforce, has practically vanished, dropping from 42% to under 17%.
This is what economists call an inverted dependency ratio.
An inverted dependency ratio. Okay, explain that.
The dependency ratio is essentially a measure of the people in a society who are pulling the economic wagon versus the people who are riding in the wagon.
Okay, I like that image.
The workers are pulling, the children and the elderly are riding. For decades, Aruba had a massive workforce, pulling a relatively small number of retirees.
But now that ratio is flipping.
Exactly. The group pulling the wagon is shrinking, and the group riding in the wagon, specifically the elderly, who are far more expensive to support than children, is ballooning.
But wait, a lot of developed nations are dealing with aging populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Japan is famous for it, Italy, Germany, parts of the U.S.
Yeah, it's a global trend in developed nations.
So why is this uniquely dangerous for a micro-island?
Because of the spatial constraints we talked about earlier.
Right. Space.
If Germany has a labor shortage in its industrial sector, it can adjust its immigration policies and absorb hundreds of thousands of young workers from Eastern Europe or beyond.
Because they have the physical space, the suburbs, the continental infrastructure to house them?
Exactly. Aruba does not have a next state over. They have 600 people per square kilometer.
So if they try to import a massive foreign workforce to replace their missing youth and care for their elderly, where do those workers live?
Right. How does the water system handle them?
The physical boundaries of the island prevent them from using the standard macroeconomic band-aid.
Exactly.
So this raises a massive logistical question. If the island is physically maxed out on space, and the domestic workforce is shrinking while the retirement burden is exploding,
how on earth is this island generating enough cash to maintain a $30,000 per capita GDP?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you keep a high-income society afloat when the demographic engine is stalling out?
You do it by running a single-engine economy at maximum capacity with zero margin for error.
Wow.
We have to look at the macroeconomic structure they've built to survive this.
Which takes us to slide 5, the macroeconomy, high income but highly vulnerable. The visual here is a 2D bar chart for total GDP layered with a line chart for the GDP growth rate. And the data is fascinating.
It really paints a picture of volatility.
They maintain this incredible high-income status, $25,000 to over $30,000 per capita. But the growth rate of that GDP is wildly erratic.
It's not a smooth, steady climb at all.
No, it features moments of massive prosperity punctuated by violent, plunging negative growth during certain years.
The brief even asks to draw dashed circles around those years of negative growth, specifically noting that micro-open economies are extremely sensitive to external shocks.
High income but high fragility. To understand why a wealthy economy would be so fragile, we have to look at slide 6.
The industrial structure.
Yeah, how they actually make their money. And this is the 100% stacked bar chart showing the evolution of agriculture, industry, and services.
And it is a visual representation of putting every single egg you own into one basket.
Literally. The brief asks for a bold black arrow pointing directly at the service sector, because the service sector accounts for roughly 75 to over 80% of their entire economic output.
It's absolute dominance.
Now let's look at what they don't do. Agriculture. Practically non-existent.
Less than 1% of their GDP.
Manufacturing. Historically, it peaked around a meager 6.6% and has since withered to under 3%.
They are entirely, absolutely reliant on services. This is the definition of a hyper-specialized, single-engine economy.
Let's think through the daily logistical reality of an economy with 0% agriculture and under 3% manufacturing.
It means they produce almost nothing tangible.
Right. They cannot feed themselves, they cannot build their own smartphones, their own cars, or their own medical equipment.
Every single tomato eaten in a resort restaurant.
Every gallon of gasoline burned in a taxi.
Every concrete block used to build a house.
Has to be physically placed on a cargo ship or an airplane, transported across the ocean, and unloaded at their port.
It's staggering when you really think about the logistics of that.
When I look at the mechanics of this, I think of a world-class tightrope walker performing without a net.
That's a great way to put it.
Aruba is incredibly skilled at what they do. They execute high-end services at an elite global level, and they are highly compensated for it.
Which explains the massive GDP.
Exactly. But they have absolutely nothing underneath them to break a fall.
No safety net.
If a nation with a diversified economy faces a tourism slump, they can lean on their manufacturing exports, or at least they have a domestic agricultural base to ensure food security.
Aruba has none of that.
If global supply chains freeze, or if a stiff wind blows, say, a global financial crisis or a pandemic that stops air travel,
the tightrope walker wobbles, and there is no safety net. The economy doesn't just dip, it craters.
And the trade data on slide 7 illustrates that tightrope perfectly.
Ah, yes. The trade slide.
It's a comparative bar chart and infographic breaking down import and export structures. Because they must import every single physical item required to sustain a modern, high-income society, they operate with a massive, perpetual deficit in merchandise and goods trade.
Hundreds of millions of dollars are constantly hemorrhaging out of the island just to buy the basics of survival.
Right. To prevent the island from going bankrupt, they have to inject massive amounts of foreign capital back into the system.
And since they don't export manufactured goods, they export experiences.
Specifically, tourism. The design actually calls for a circle around the tourism service export percentage with a call-out line labeling it the core engine of foreign exchange and economic growth.
Because tourism makes up between 75 and 87% of all their service exports.
They are paying for their imported tomatoes and their imported gasoline by convincing foreigners to fly in and rent a hotel room.
Consider the extreme geopolitical and psychological vulnerability of that position.
It's terrifying.
Upwards of 80% of your foreign exchange revenue relies on a highly discretionary, luxury decision made by people living thousands of miles away.
Your entire economy depends on the premise that middle and upper-class citizens in North America and Europe will wake up, feel secure in their own domestic economies, decide they have enough disposable income, and choose to purchase a flight to your specific island.
Yes. If interest rates spike in the United States and the American middle class decides to do a staycation instead of flying to the Caribbean, Aruba's GDP takes a direct hit.
Or if a geopolitical crisis makes commercial aviation fuel astronomically expensive, driving ticket prices up, Aruba takes a hit.
They have essentially outsourced the control of their economic destiny to the disposable income fluctuations of foreign nations.
Wow. But, we have to give them credit for how flawlessly they operate that single engine.
Oh, absolutely.
To extract $30,000 per capita out of foreign tourists, you cannot simply offer a beautiful beach.
There are thousands of beautiful beaches in the developing world that don't generate high-income economies.
Right. To command that kind of premium pricing, you must provide a frictionless first-world experience.
A tourist from New York or London expects their hotel in Aruba to function with the exact same technological and infrastructural efficiency as their apartment back home.
And that requires building what we can call the invisible infrastructure. Which brings us to slide 8, digital and infrastructure.
The highly connected island.
Yes. This slide features a smooth, dark blue line chart. And the digital metrics here completely shatter the antiquated stereotype of the sleepy, disconnected Caribbean island.
No, totally shatters it.
The data tracks internet penetration skyrocketing from near zero to over 97%.
97% is incredible.
And simultaneously, mobile cellular subscriptions exceed 130 per 100 people.
Meaning there are significantly more active mobile connections than there are actual human beings on the island.
Yeah. The brief actually asks for a vertical dashed line with an asterisk right where internet penetration breaches 90%, labeling it the comprehensive digital era.
We really need to understand why a 97% internet penetration rate is a matter of macroeconomic survival, not just a luxury.
Right. It's not just for scrolling social media on the beach.
Exactly. Think about the hidden mechanics of global tourism. It's not just handing someone a room key. It is a massive data processing operation.
Millions of global financial transactions must be securely routed every day.
International hotel supply chains must be digitally managed in real time.
And the modern tourist expects to stream high-definition video in their room and join remote Zoom calls from the lobby.
If an island's digital infrastructure is laggy or prone to blackouts, the high-end tourists simply will not return.
And the global hotel brands will pull their investment.
A near-perfect telecom grid is the central nervous system of their GDP.
But, the servers and the fiber optic cables are useless without highly capable people to operate them.
Which is exactly what Slide 9 covers. Human capital.
The high level of basic education. This is suggested as a dumbbell chart comparing male and female literacy.
And the data here is genuinely staggering.
We're looking at adult and youth literacy rates sustained at an incredibly high 97 to 99%.
The slide specifically mandates a green check mark next to the gender literacy data, highlighting high-level human capital with gender equality.
This is the result of deliberate long-term policy, isn't it?
Yes. The government historically recognized that since they lacked physical resources to mine, they had to aggressively mine their own brain power.
Right.
By dedicating a massive proportion of government expenditure to basic and advanced education, they engineered a domestic workforce capable of managing complex, multilingual, high-stress service environments.
But then we get to slide 10, public health and welfare. And the X-ray reveals a dark spot precisely where you would expect to see a triumph.
The health paradox.
Yeah. This slide uses large number infographics. And at first glance, it's a massive victory. They boast near 100% access to basic drinking water and sanitation facilities.
Which is an incredible achievement.
Their infant mortality rates are incredibly low. They've effectively eradicated the historic demons that plague developing nations.
Oh.
But right next to those victories, the design demands a massive red warning box.
Circling the data on diabetes and non-communicable diseases, or NCDs.
Labeling it a typical health challenge of a developed economy.
This is perhaps the most profound paradox in the entire dataset. What we are looking at is called an epidemiological transition.
Okay, break that down for me.
For centuries, the primary existential threats to tropical island populations were communicable diseases, things like malaria, cholera, infectious outbreaks, or simply dying from waterborne pathogens.
Right.
Through wealth, education, and modern infrastructure, Aruba conquered those threats. They built first-world sanitation and exceptional early life medical care.
So they solved the problems of poverty, only to inherit the diseases of extreme wealth.
Precisely. Let's look at the mechanics of why a high-income service economy triggers an explosion in non-communicable diseases.
It comes back to the lack of agriculture and the nature of the work, doesn't it?
Exactly. Because they import almost all their food, they rely heavily on the global supply chain, which is optimized for processed, shelf-stable, calorie-dense foods.
Fresh, locally grown produce is scarce and expensive.
And their entire population works in the service sector. They aren't engaged in heavy manual labor in agriculture or manufacturing.
Right, they're working at desks, managing logistics, or working in hospitality management.
You combine a highly sedentary lifestyle with a heavily imported, westernized, highly processed diet, and the biological result is a catastrophic rise in metabolic disorders.
Diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease.
They are dying from the exact same systemic health issues that plague the United States and Western Europe.
But again, because they are a microstate with an aging population, the financial strain this places on their healthcare system is heavily magnified.
Treating chronic diabetes over a 20-year retirement is exponentially more expensive than treating an acute infection in a young person.
Okay, I want to pause here and really push back on the core strategy of this island. Let's synthesize what we know.
Okay, let's do it.
We have an island with a highly educated 99% literate workforce. They are entirely bilingual or trilingual.
Yep.
They have an incredibly robust 97% penetration digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
If they have the brains, the education, and the bandwidth, why are they still so deeply reliant on the physical act of tourism?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Right. Why aren't they just building software? Why aren't they acting as a massive remote work hub or a digital logistics center that doesn't require millions of tourists to physically fly in, consume their imported food, and stress their physical infrastructure?
It's a brilliant theoretical pivot, but the answer is brutally grounded in the laws of physics.
Physics?
Yes. Before you can become a frictionless digital utopia, you have to power the servers, you have to keep the air conditioning blasting in the data centers, the hospitals, and the high-density housing.
And historically, generating that power on an isolated rock in the ocean has been a dirty, phenomenally expensive, and economically fragile endeavor.
We have to look at the energy matrix.
Which takes us to slide 11. Environmental crisis. High carbon emissions and fossil fuel dependence.
It's the carbon trap.
Yeah. The visual here is an area chart showing fossil fuel consumption. And the historical baseline here is shocking.
Almost 100%.
Yes. To maintain this high-income, hyper-connected lifestyle, Aruba historically relied on imported fossil fuels for nearly 100% of its energy consumption.
And because of the massive demands of the tourism sector.
Just imagine the electricity required to air condition, massive luxury resorts, 247 in a tropical climate.
Right.
Their per capita CO2 emissions historically skyrocketed, sitting significantly higher than the global average.
And the slide asks for a thick gray arrow pointing to the carbon emissions data, labeled heavy environmental cost of traditional energy structures.
Let's define the mechanics of energy use in this specific context, because if you are a continent, you have options.
Right. You can dam a river for hydropower, you can mine domestic coal, you can tap domestic natural gas.
Aruba has no rivers for hydro. They have no coal.
Every single watt of electricity required to run a hospital ventilator, chill a refrigerator, or power a cell tower has to be generated by burning a heavy liquid fossil fuel.
A fuel that was extracted in another country, refined in another country, loaded onto a massive tanker ship, sailed across the ocean, and burned in a local power plant.
So the environmental cost is obvious, massive carbon emissions. But there is a deeper macroeconomic vulnerability here, isn't there?
Absolutely. When 100% of your baseline survival relies on importing oil, you are economically hostage to the global commodity markets.
If a conflict breaks out in the Middle East and the price of oil spikes by 40%, Aruba's economy begins to choke instantly.
The profit margins on their tourism sector vanish because the base cost of keeping the hotel lights on just doubled.
And the capital that should be staying on the island to fund education and pensions instead bleeds out to foreign oil companies just to keep the grew alive.
That is the carbon trap.
But the data shows a dramatic attempt to break out of that trap on slide 12.
Energy transition, the dawn of renewable energy.
This is a stepped line chart to really highlight a sudden dramatic change.
Yeah, there is a massive inflection point highlighted. We see a structural pivot where non-hydro renewable energy, specifically wind and solar, jumps from absolute zero to a peak of nearly 19% of their total energy generation.
The slide actually demands a massive, bold, green upward arrow right where it crosses the 10% mark, calling it a historic inflection point in energy structural transition.
And from an engineering perspective, it really is, isn't it?
Achieving nearly 19% renewable penetration on an isolated microgrid is a staggering technical achievement.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
19% doesn't sound that high to a casual listener. You look at places like Texas or Germany, and they produce massive amounts of wind and solar power. Why is 19% treated as a monumental engineering feat for Aruba?
Because of a concept called grid inertia and frequency regulation. In a massive continental grid like Europe or North America, if the wind suddenly stops blowing over a wind farm in Texas, the grid can instantly pull power from a natural gas plant in Oklahoma.
Or draw on the massive spinning momentum of the entire continental system to keep the lights from flickering.
Exactly. They can balance the load. They have backup.
Aruba has no backup.
Zero. There is no extension cord connecting them to South America. Their grid is entirely isolated.
And solar and wind power are inherently intermittent. Clouds cover the sun, the wind drops.
If your grid is heavily reliant on renewables and a sudden weather shift occurs, you lose power generation in seconds.
Wow.
On an isolated microgrid, managing those wild voltage fluctuations second by second without letting the entire island go black is an incredibly delicate, high-stakes balancing act.
Beyond the engineering of the grid itself, let's talk about the physical space. This goes back to the carrying capacity we discussed earlier.
Right, the 600 people per square kilometer.
Where do you physically put the infrastructure for renewable energy? Wind turbines are massive industrial structures. Solar farms require vast acreage to generate meaningful gigawatts.
How do you scale that when you have almost zero open land?
That is the ultimate spatial conflict of the microstate. You are trying to solve a 21st century energy crisis within a 19th century geographical footprint.
You cannot simply pave the pristine white sand beaches with solar panels because those beaches are the sole engine of your 80% service economy.
Right. If you ruin the visual aesthetic of the island with heavy industrial wind farms, the tourists stop coming.
But if you don't build the wind farms, you remain economically hostage to imported oil.
It is an agonizing policy tightrope.
And I think it's crucial to pause right here and remind you, the listener, of the strict parameters of our analysis today.
Yes, very important.
We are looking at this transition exactly as the data presents it. The source material does not frame this pivot to wind and solar as a moral crusade or a politically charged climate policy.
No, it frames it purely as raw, calculated economic survival.
The shift away from fossil fuels is presented as a structural necessity to mitigate supply chain vulnerabilities, stabilize energy costs, and stop the hemorrhaging of domestic capital.
It is an exercise in macroeconomic resilience, independent of any ideological stance on global climate change. We're just looking at the data.
Exactly. And to execute a transition of this magnitude, balancing an isolated, intermittent power grid, navigating this spatial conflicts of tourism, managing an exploding elderly demographic, and fighting off external economic shocks.
You cannot rely on luck. You cannot rely on a few smart individuals.
You need deep systemic institutional competence.
Which brings us to slide 13, national governance, the high-quality institutional environment.
This might be the most important slide in the deck.
Really, more important than the renewables or the internet penetration.
Without question.
Okay, well, the visual here is either a radar chart or a horizontal bar chart displaying the World Bank governance indicators, the WGI.
And the numbers are exceptional.
Aruba consistently scores in the 80th to 89th percentiles globally for rule of law. And for government effectiveness and control of corruption, they're consistently above the 80th percentile.
The slide asks for blue circles drawn around all the metrics over 80%, explicitly labeling it an outstanding institutional dividend.
Okay, so why is this the most important data point?
Because the developing world is absolutely littered with nations that have beautiful tourist destinations or vast natural resources, but whose populations live in grinding poverty.
Right.
Why? Because of corruption. Money flows in from foreign investors or tourists, and it is immediately siphoned off by kleptocrats or lost in a maze of bureaucratic inefficiency. The fact that Aruba maintains a $25,000 to $30,000 GDP per capita is not a lucky accident of geography. It is the direct causal result of their strict adherence to the rule of law.
Let's explain how the rule of law actually functions as an economic engine. How does a high percentile in a World Bank index translate to cash in the pocket of an Aruban citizen?
It translates through trust and capital allocation. When a massive foreign hotel conglomerate decides to invest $100 million to build a new luxury resort, they need absolute certainty that the local courts function properly.
They need to know their property won't be arbitrarily expropriated by a corrupt politician.
Exactly. When highly educated citizens pay their income taxes, they need to trust that the money won't disappear into a Swiss bank account.
But will actually be used to fund the desalination plants that provide their drinking water or the schools that maintain their 99% literacy rate.
High governance percentiles mean the friction of doing business is low and the retention of capital is high. That is the invisible shield protecting their fragile economy.
But even with that shield, the data culminates in slide 14, the risk matrix.
A very sobering visual.
It synthesizes all the vulnerabilities we've discussed into 3 overlapping 2D circles of different sizes.
Circle 1 is economic vulnerability.
Right, they are dangerously overconcentrated in a single industry, tourism, which is over 80% of exports, meaning they're fully exposed to global demand shocks.
Circle 2 is demographic risk.
Their population is rapidly aging out of the workforce. The over 65 group is over 17%, the dependency ratio is spiking, and the domestic labor pipeline is drying up.
And Circle 3 is resource dependence.
Despite their impressive 19% renewable pivot, they still rely heavily on imported fossil fuels to keep the lights on, and they have a massive goods deficit because they import virtually 100% of their food.
The slide just places the text systemic risk right in the overlapping center of those 3 circles. No complex imagery, just simple lines pointing to a perfect storm of structural constraints.
They've achieved wealth, but that wealth is balanced on the head of a pin.
They are rich, but they cannot feed themselves. They cannot power themselves entirely. Their population is getting too old to work, and their entire cash flow relies on the whims of foreign tourists getting on airplanes.
So how does the data project a way out? What is the strategic outlook for an island trapped in this matrix?
That's slide 15, conclusions and strategic outlook.
It uses a 3-column text layout with minimalist data boxes, and it maps out a very narrow, highly ambitious path forward.
First, they have to forcefully deepen the energy transition.
Right. They have to push that renewable energy mix far beyond the 19% mark, navigating those engineering and spatial nightmares we talked about, to definitively break their reliance on imported oil and lower the cost of living.
Second, they have to finally execute on that theoretical pivot we discussed earlier, industrial diversification.
They must leverage their 97% internet penetration and their highly educated workforce to develop a true digital economy. They have to lower their singular dependence on tourism.
And third, they have to use their top-tier rule of law to solve their demographic crisis.
Since they cannot breed a new workforce fast enough to support their aging population, they have to import one.
But they can't just import low-wage manual labor. They need high-income contributors who won't drain their social services.
They have to convince the global talent pool, digital nomads, tech workers, highly skilled professionals, that Aruba is not just a place to visit for a week, but a safe, highly connected, impeccably governed place to live, work, and innovate.
Because of that 80-plus percentile in rule of law.
Exactly. The final slide just leaves a lot of white space at the bottom with the text data-driven insights centered to really hammer home the academic rigor.
Their ultimate survival mechanism is no longer just selling the postcard of a beautiful beach. It is monetizing their brainpower, their digital infrastructure, and their institutional trust.
This has been an absolutely incredible journey. We started this deep dive looking at a blank, minimalist white data brief, expecting a dry recitation of economic statistics.
And by peeling back the layers, by looking closely at the X-ray, we uncovered a high-stakes, life-or-death balancing act.
We saw how demographics, macroeconomics, public health, and energy grids are deeply, inextricably linked. Aruba is not just a Caribbean vacation spot. It is a highly tuned, intensely stressed machine operating at the absolute razor's edge of its physical and economic capacity.
It completely forces you to reevaluate what the word vulnerability actually means.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to associate vulnerability with poverty, but this data proves that you can be highly wealthy, highly educated, and highly developed and still remain structurally fragile to the core.
I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought to mull over. Something that wasn't explicitly written on any of these minimalist slides, but that just screams out from between the lines of the data.
Okay.
Look at the exact problems Aruba is fighting tooth and nail to solve right now. A rapidly aging population, a shrinking workforce, and an upside-down dependency ratio. The desperate, expensive need to transition an entire energy grid away from fossil fuels while maintaining modern living standards, extreme vulnerability to global supply chains, the absolute unforgiving physical limits of carrying capacity. Aren't these the exact same existential problems the entire planet is starting to face?
Wow.
The whole world is eventually going to see stalling population growth. The global demographic pyramid is aging. Every nation has to figure out the logistical nightmare of the energy transition. Aruba is not an anomaly.
Oh, it's not.
Micro-island states like Aruba might actually be the canaries in the coal mine for the entire human race.
They're just experiencing the pressures of a closed system much faster than the rest of us.
Exactly. They don't have the luxury of vast continental space or unlimited time. They are being forced to solve the 21st century's most terrifying structural problems first.
And if they figure out how to survive the pressure cooker, they might just write the survival manual for the rest of us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you look at a spreadsheet, a slide deck, or a simple data point, remember you aren't just looking at numbers. If you look closely enough and ask the right questions, you are looking at the pulse of human survival, profound vulnerability, and incredible ingenuity.